The last echoes of Cadia still linger in the void. The fortress world is broken, its surface split like old bone. Yet among the shattered rock and drifting dust clouds, faint transmissions persist. They flicker through the static, like dying candles, fragmentary voices whispering of banners still raised, of regiments refusing to acknowledge their own annihilation. To the wider Imperium, Cadia is gone, a martyr remembered in sermons and carved into marble. But to those who listen carefully, who strain their vox units against the roar of the warp, a disturbing truth bleeds through. Some Cadians still march. Their boots strike ground that no longer exists. Their guns fire in silence. Their orders come from commanders long dead. Entire regiments vanish from the rolls overnight, consumed by the ruin of their world, yet their absence is never explained. Perhaps they have perished, or perhaps they continue to fight, unseen, in the shadow of a broken star. If you find yourself drawn to the hidden places of the Imperium, the stories never printed on a data slate, the rumors whispered in the dark between battles, then you are in the right place. This is where we peel back the curtain and let the forgotten echoes speak. If the unknown compels you, if the mysteries of Warhammer 40K keep you awake long after the vid screen fades, then lend your strength to this channel. Subscribe, share with your fellow lore seekers, and join us in keeping these stories alive, because some tales are too haunting to be silenced. Chapter 1. The Silent Muster. The air over Cadia's corpse is still heavy with promethium smoke. Even now, years after the planet's bones were shattered, the void around it remains cloaked in a haze of drifting ash and pulverized rock. To gaze upon it is to see a wound in reality, a rent that bleeds both memory and ruin. Yet somewhere beneath that drifting pall, in caverns carved deep into the broken crust, boots still strike stone. The sound is steady, deliberate, rhythmic, the unmistakable cadence of a regiment mustering. No banners rise above them, for the colors have long since burned away. No parade ground marks their place, for the surface has been torn into fragments and scattered into the void. Still they form their lines, rows upon rows of men and women, clad in battered flak armor, whose insignia has faded to near invisibility. Their last guns hum with dying charges, their bayonets glint with the dull sheen of rust, but their discipline, impossibly, has not decayed. They stand in formation, silent as statues, waiting for orders that never come. A survivor who claims to have witnessed this silent muster describes it in hushed tones, like a confession spoken in a cathedral. He had been scavenging through a collapsed manufactorum, searching for rations among the wreckage. At first he thought the steady sound was his own heartbeat echoing in the stone. But as he descended deeper into the tunnels, he found himself standing at the edge of a cavern, lit only by the faint red glow of emergency lumens. And there, stretching from wall to wall, was a regiment that should not have existed. Hundreds of guardsmen, every helmet forward, every weapon shouldered, every face hidden in shadow. None spoke, none broke rank. He swears their eyes gleamed faintly, catching the light like animals in the dark, though he could not be sure. When he fled, he heard the sound of boots following him for a time, but when he turned back, the ranks remained unmoved. The truth is impossible to verify. Perhaps he stumbled upon a unit so traumatized by loss that they clung to routine like drowning men to driftwood. Perhaps the cavern was empty, and his mind, cracked by deprivation, conjured the phantoms of comrades lost. But his account is not the only one. Over the years, similar whispers have surfaced. A salvage crew claims to have found ration crates stacked in impossible precision, each stamped with the faded mark of Cadia's tithes. Another speaks of vox interference deep beneath the ruins, faint barked commands, given in the clipped tones of an officer, though no living commander has ever been identified. Those who listen long enough to the void's whispers know this. Discipline is the Imperium's marrow. Strip a guardsman of food, of weapons, even of hope itself, and still he will obey the last order drilled into him. Perhaps the regiments beneath Cadia do not realize their world is gone. Perhaps they refuse to realize it. To admit such truth would be to surrender to despair, and the Astra Militarum does not surrender. And so they muster, day after day, in silence. There are darker theories, of course. Some adepts argue that no human body could survive so long in the tunnels without sustenance. They suggest the regiments are no longer mortal, but echoes imprinted into the stone, replaying their duty like an endless drill. Others whisper of worse things, that the warp itself has ensnared them, binding their oaths to a reality that no longer exists, that they do not muster for the Emperor at all, but for another master whose voice commands from the shadows. Still, the most haunting detail is this: whenever one of these sightings is reported, the regiments never seem to be the same. Different uniforms, different formations, different faces glimpsed in the gloom, as though Cadia's broken surface houses not one phantom regiment, but many. Entire units lost from the administratum's rolls, forgotten in the chaos of Abaddon's assault, now gathering in unmarked caverns to fulfill a duty that outlived their planet. The silent muster is more than just rumor. It is an omen. For if discipline can bind men beyond death, if duty itself can outlast the soil beneath their feet, then perhaps Cadia never truly fell. Perhaps the world itself lingers, not in marble or memory, but in the endless echo of boots striking stone, far below where light can reach. The tunnels beneath Cadia's fractured surface are a labyrinth of collapsed ferrocrete, twisted steel, and forgotten sanctums. No light of Terra ever reaches here. Only the weak pulse of emergency lumens, long since drained to a dying glow, offers any reprieve from the crushing dark. It is in this place that men whisper of finding the muster not as an echo, but as a presence, something that breathes and shifts, even when no lungs draw air. One guardsman, a veteran of the 122nd Cadian, claimed he stumbled upon them while retreating from a raiding band of heretic marauders. He had dragged himself, bleeding, into the depths, convinced that his death was certain. What he found was worse than silence. The sound of boots, perfectly synchronized, filled the stone corridors. The air was damp, carrying the sour stench of sweat and rusted metal, yet it carried no warmth of life. He turned a corner and froze. Before him stretched a column of soldiers, helmets dull with dust, weapons clutched in trembling hands that should have been too brittle to hold them. They marched past him without a word, their steps ringing like a funeral toll. He shouted, begged, demanded to know their orders. None answered, not one turned their head. When the column had passed, the air grew colder, as though the warmth of his body had been leached into their ranks. He swears he heard a commander's voice, then, not shouted, but whispered, as if spoken directly into his skull. Form up, stand to, hold the line. He obeyed without thought, falling into step behind them until the sound of approaching marauders broke his trance. When he turned back, the soldiers were gone, as if swallowed whole by the stone. The Imperium does not write such tales. To inscribe them upon a data slate would be heresy of implication, suggesting that the guard are bound by something beyond faith or flesh. Yet the story spread, carried from mouth to mouth like a contagion. Each telling adds detail, the glint of green eyes in the dark, the static of Vox traffic spitting orders from unknown sources, the smell of ozone thick in the caverns, as though lost fire had just been discharged. None of it can be proved, but all of it fits too neatly to be ignored. What makes these sightings unbearable is not just the image of phantom regiments marching in silence, but the thought of why they remain. Do they wait for a commander who will never arrive? Do they believe the Cadian gate still stands, that their orders still hold weight against the tides of chaos? Or are they nothing more than the after-image of loyalty, burned so deep into the fabric of the world that even its death cannot erase them? Those who venture near these caverns claim the walls themselves hum faintly, vibrating like the skin of a great drum. If one presses an ear against the stone, they hear more than boots. They hear cadence calls, discipline drills, the clipped voices of sergeants and captains long reduced to ash. Some have even claimed to hear hymns, the old Cadian marching songs, half-forgotten verses carried on the vibration of rock. It is enough to drive many to madness, For how does one fight against an enemy when your own dead refuse to rest, when they still hold the line in places that no longer exist? The Adeptus Mechanicus has, on rare occasion, sent servitors to probe these depths. None have returned with viable recordings. The data streams they carried back are nothing but static, occasionally broken by bursts of vox code that predate the fall. The priests dismiss it as corrupted memory, nothing more. Yet among the rank and file, the belief endures. Cadia still musters, Cadia still fights, and in that belief lies both hope and horror. The first time I realized the muster might be watching us, not guarding us, was when the fires died without smoke. We had holed up in a collapsed transit gallery, an old mag-lined tunnel whose rails had been ripped up and repurposed as barricade spikes. 3 of us, ragged as flayed banners, huddled around a glow pan burning scavenged promethium. The flame should have licked the rock with a greasy plume, but the air stayed clean, as if the tunnel itself refused to carry the stain. Rin kept glancing down the curve of the gallery, toward a mouth of deeper dark. I told him the wind was turning. He said it wasn't the wind. The sound arrived first, a thin chain of footfalls, perfectly spaced, each strike of boot to stone, answering some distant metronome. I felt it more than heard it, a rhythm ticking through my teeth, a pulse without blood. We killed the pan, and let the tunnel swallow our outlines. The glow bled from our vision, leaving the taste of metal and old ashes on the tongue. The footfalls did not quicken, they did not waver, they simply came on, as if the thing that wore those boots did not need to see to know the route. Rin lifted his lasgun, and the charge indicator stuttered, sputtering between red and nothing. I touched his forearm, and pressed down, not out of courage, but because I had the irrational conviction that raising a weapon would make us visible in some other sense, not to eyes, but to protocol. It came around the bend as a line, a file 3 wide, faces occluded by visors frosted with grit. The nearest helm turned, not quite toward us, but adjacent, like a man tracking a phantom at the edge of a parade ground. The vox grills were dead, but I heard breath, not warm, not fogging, more like a saw rasping through wet wood. One trooper paused, and the ozone bite of spent last cells washed over us, fresh and sharp, wrong in a tunnel that hadn't seen a firefight in months. They weren't hunting heretics, they weren't patrolling a perimeter, they were measuring. I felt it in the way their heads moved, in that slow, even sweep, in the way the column paused at junctions that no longer existed on any map and waited precisely 12 heartbeats before proceeding. Rin whispered a cadence number from Cadian drill, the one drill master's bark before a change of pace. The column shifted step, as if hearing him, then corrected without missing a beat. I could not have spoken if a bolt pistol had been at my teeth. They passed, and yet they did not pass. The boots receded, but the pressure of them remained. We relit the pan, and the fuel took flame without complaint, as if nothing had intruded. I told myself we were safe. The tunnel disagreed. Grease on the rail barricade gleamed in new patterns, arcs drawn by an invisible hand. On the wall above us, a smear of ash had taken on the shape of a unit sigil, one I did not recognize, though I know Cadian heraldry, like I know the weight of a lasgun stock. The aquila above it was correct in form, and wrong in feel, tilted a degree off true, like a prayer recited one word out of order. We moved camp after that. Hunger drove us toward the supply vaults, rumored to be intact beneath a ruined administratum wing. The vault doors were gone, peeled like fruit skin, but inside the shelves were full, neat bricks of ration bars stacked by height and date. I reached for one and hesitated. The stacks were too precise, not simply tidy, parade ground straight, the kind of order that only exists in inspection nightmares. Rin muttered that we were lucky. I said we were observed. He laughed at that and bit down. He chewed once, twice, then stopped, eyes shining with a sudden wetness. "It's fresh," he said. "Saints, the salt is fresh." He put the rest back exactly where he had found it, aligning the edge to the shelf with trembling care. The vox woke that night, not the broadband whine of cosmic noise, not the guttering cough of a dying set, but clipped phrases in a voice that carried sand and drill square dust. Section 2. Dress your line. Third rank. Adjust 1 pace left. Sergeant Halvin. Account your troopers. Names I did not know. Ranks that belonged to nothing living in our tunnel network. I answered before I knew I had spoken, giving a count of 3 in a silence, where the 4th should have been, and in the dead space after my report, I heard a pen scratch a data slate that could not exist. Then noted, the channel died. Rin stared at me as if I had signed us into the ledger of the dead. From then on, the signs multiplied. Where we placed our bedrolls, chalk marks appeared in the night denoting spacing, a regulation 2 handspans between bodies. The mess kit we left to soak returned dried and nested. The spoon set bowl up, the knives edge in, exactly as the monitorum favors. A bayonet we used as a stake went missing, later found honed and sheathed at my side. The calculus of it became unbearable. If they were protecting us, why never show a face? If they were us, why did they correct us like instructors chastising conscripts? And if they were something else entirely, why did the touch of them feel like discipline rather than malice? I tried to trap the pattern. I left a note, inked on the back of a tattered ration wrapper. State orders. I set it on the shelf with the ration bricks, aligned to the edge, and drew a line of dust along its top to catch movement. We slept to the murmur of stone and memory. When I woke, the dust line lay undisturbed. The wrapper remained, but my words were erased. In their place, a single phrase printed in block letters I recognized from every barracks wall I had ever scrubbed. Hold your post. It is the cruelest order to give a Cadian. It is also the only one we know how to obey without thinking. We held, and the tunnel listened. Somewhere beyond our light, boots measured the world that remained, and found it wanting. Somewhere in the dark, an officer without lungs scratched another mark in a ledger without paper, and I began to wonder if the vanishing regiments were not missing at all, but present everywhere, seeing us as a deficiency of alignment, a failure of dress, an untidy remainder left after the arithmetic of a world destroyed. We moved again at dawn, if dawn can be said to exist where the sun is only a rumor. The gallery opened into a junction where 5 tunnels met like fingers at a broken wrist. There, set into the floor, we found a parade diamond chalked in perfect geometry. No footprints marred it, no debris crossed its lines. It waited, patient as stone. Rin asked if we should stand to. I did not answer. Somewhere behind my ribs, an old drum began to beat, slow and even, and I realized the question had been asked in the wrong direction. It wasn't whether we should stand to, it was whether we already had. Chapter 2. Shackled beneath the Aquila. The discipline that found us in the tunnels did not fade when we moved on. It crystallized. Hunger and thirst carve sharp edges in men, but under the 2-headed shadow of the Aquila, they do not splinter, they slot into place. We learned this as the days blurred into one another. Time measured not by a sun that no longer had authority here, but by the cadence of invisible boots and the ritual of inspection hours that arrived without clocks. Rin started setting his bedroll with the crease toward the notional parade front. I started folding my rag of a blanket into a square that remembered barracks sheets. Neither of us spoke of why. Obedience, once awakened, walks itself. Food narrowed to a taste of iron and chalk. The ration vaults offered less with each visit, as if the stacks consumed themselves in order to remain perfect. We learned to eat from the edges of the bricks, shaving slivers so the face stayed clean. Water came from condensation trays under cracked coolant pipes, a thin metallic dew that left the tongue numb. I found that prayer helped it go down. Not the cathedral liturgies of Terra I'd heard once through a vox hymnal, but the Cadian barracks graces, muttered and plain. Emperor, make this enough. Emperor, make me enough. When I finished, my mouth tasted of oil and oath. We slept in a maintenance bay where the floor sloped like a tired shoulder. Above us hung a tangle of dead cabling that looked like a forest of black roots, and every so often one of the strands shivered as though a current passed through a system long severed. I told myself it was settling stone. Rin told me the muster was counting. After the first night, Our kit lay arranged to a regulation spacing that neither of us remembered setting. My boots were exactly heel to wall. His mess tin lid was angled neatly to drain. Discipline had developed fingers. The Vox returned with a temperate regularity, not a broadcast but a visitation. Orders came like old rain. Stand to on the 3rd. Check spacing. Verify charge. The voice did not demand names. It assumed them. Once when I murmured that Section 3 reported 1 casualty, none missing, the voice accepted the lie with the softness of a gauze press. Noted. The word left an ache in the room. Rin avoided my eyes until sleep took him, and even then his jaw worked like a man chewing a secret. I dreamed of parade squares without sky. We found a Munitorum crate wedged in a stairwell like a tooth in a giant's jaw. The locks were sheared, but the interior had been repacked to an order that mocked the violence that opened it. Bandages lay in bundled tens, needles nested point to eye, ampoules aligned until their menisci made one continuous line of pale amber. A pamphlet slipped free when I lifted a roll of gauze. It was half melted, the paper fused in places to the wax of a purity seal, whose sigil had run in the heat. What text remained showed a drill diagram and a sentence that might have been a benediction once, now broken into patient fragments. You will be held, you will be counted, you will not be alone. Rin called it a mercy, I called it a promise, which is a different species of threat. Hunger remakes the mind into a smaller room. In that room, the walls are rules. We measured steps between posts not because we thought an enemy would come, but because the distance between certainty and panic feels manageable when you can count it. The muster's corrections became a kind of weather. Chalk marks appeared when we slacked, and when we honored them, they vanished as if licked by an invisible tongue. Once when I left my bayonet unsheathed beside the bedroll, a scrawl bloomed on the floorboards beyond my reach. A single word in block letters, Cephati. I sheathed it and slept. In the morning, the scrawl was gone, and the floor was cleaner than any other patch in the bay, as if polished by boot heels that had never stumbled. On the 5th day, or what passed for it, Rin broke. Not loudly. There were no oaths thrown against the stone, no theatrical tearing of kit. He simply sat with his back to the wall and pressed 2 fingers against the aquila stamped into his flak plate until the skin went white. Who do we belong to? He asked. The question lodged like grit beneath a bandage. I wanted to say the Emperor, to speak the catechism that keeps a guardsman's heart beating in the face of numbers that say he shouldn't, but the word stuck. The Emperor is light, and there is no light here. The Emperor is order, I thought, and something in the dark nodded. We tried to test the limits of our shackles. I set a watch not at the top of the hour, but 1 minute askew. The Vox clicked once, a dry tongue against a dry tooth, nothing else. I let my canteen hang an inch out of alignment with the edge of the shelf. The room cooled by a degree, and the hairs along my arms lifted as though a storm had set its hand against the door. When I fixed it, warmth returned in a thin, embarrassed tide. Rin laughed too hard at that, and then covered his mouth like a child who had giggled at a funeral. The laugh echoed long after it ended. A rope thrown into a well, something tugged it gently, then let it go. When I finally spoke the catechism aloud, it was not for the Emperor's ears. I said it like a password to the men in the next room, to the ones whose boots I could not see. Without faith, I whispered, we are weapons without hands. The air answered in a susurrus, like cloth on cloth. A feeling of approval passed through the bay so briefly I might have imagined it. Approval, not grace. Drill, not benediction. It struck me then that the aquila stamped into our chests had become less an icon than a lock. Faith was the key that kept it tight. Faith and fear make a braided rope. You can climb by it or hang from it. We were somewhere in between. We moved again, drawn by rumor toward a depot where the shells of Chimera transports lay ribcaged beneath a caved-in roof. We navigated by Sergeant's memory and the muster's polite corrections. When we drifted wide, the chalk gave us a lane. When we hesitated at a fork, a faint, almost loving click of the Vox suggested left. We went left. I told myself we still chose. That lie tasted like old brass, and I swallowed it because there was nothing else to drink. At the depot's threshold, beneath a mural flaked down to a ghost of an Aquila wing, we found a line of helmets set along a rail, each facing outward, each visor starred with impact cracks that did not penetrate. A chalkboard leaned against the rail, its surface too clean for this place. Someone had written a timetable in a hand like an officer's stand to: 4 o'clock. Inspection, 5 o'clock. Rations, 6 o'clock. The final entry was not a time but a word, written darker than the rest, pressed until the chalk almost cut the board. Wait. We waited. We learned the weight of that word. It is the heaviest piece of kit a guardsman can carry, heavier than a flak vest soaked in rain, heavier than a guilt you cannot place. Night fell where there is no night, and the muster approached on its silent arithmetic. In that arrival, I felt the truth slide into view with the gentleness of a knife well honed. We were not surviving beneath the Aquila, we were being kept. We learned the pattern of being kept the way you learn a scar, by tracing it until the nerves beneath warn you to stop. The depot taught the first lesson. Its chimera hulls were arranged nose to tail beneath the ruptured roof. Not abandoned, but stored, as if some quartermaster of the dead had stacked them like ration bricks. Each was empty, hollow as a drum, their hatches pinned open with bent rebar that had been filed smooth. No jagged edges, no careless angles. Even the ruin here had passed inspection. A Medicae casket sat on a workbench, its lid warped by heat, purity seals melted to red tears along the hinge. Rin reached for the hasp, then paused. I saw his eyes measure the dust around the casket. No finger marks, no scuffs, just a thin, flawless bloom of gray. If we open it, he said, we'll owe an explanation. To whom, he didn't say. He didn't need to. I slid the hasp anyway, slow enough to keep the dust from rising in a telltale plume. Inside lay a roll of synth bandage, a bone saw wrapped in oiled canvas, 2 ampoules of coagulant dark as old honey, and a leather strap stamped with an administratum code that meant nothing to me, and everything to my skin. Each item had been re-rolled, re-wrapped, realigned, not untouched. Curated. The Vox clicked twice, then spilled a single word: inventory. Not a command so much as an evaluation laid across our shoulders like a cloak. Rin named the objects. I repeated them, steady as drill. When we finished, the channel cut. Nothing followed, no approval, no rebuke, just the quiet of a ledger line, completed somewhere out of sight. The casket's dust looked undisturbed when we shut it. I could not make myself look again to be sure. We took shelter in the shadow of a chimera hull, whose paint had blistered into scales. The air smelled of machine oil, and the clean acid note of solvent that has turned the corner toward rot. In the stillness, the muster's presence arranged the depot without appearing. Helmets shifted on the rail by degrees we could not witness. A line of empty ammo tins aligned themselves edge to edge between one blink and the next. A thin corridor of metal that connected the workbench to the door like a suggestion of traffic flow. When I tried to step across it, the hair along my arms lifted again, and the room cooled until my breath lost its warmth. I stepped around. Warmth returned. The correction was gentle, as always. The gentleness is what scraped at me. It felt like a hand at the back of the neck, guiding a child to proper posture. On the second day the depot coughed up a servitor. It shuddered awake in a corner we had convinced ourselves was empty, lifting its head with the slow care of an old hinge. Flesh slack, dead-eyed, mouth sewn into a permanent patience. The Medicae taint of it was faint but present, bloodless antiseptic under the deeper perfume of decay. It wore a faded stencil on its shoulder, Med-4. We watched it come online, like men watching a coffin lid rise. It did not register us. It began to clean. Not the chassis or the floor, but the chalk. There were lines we had traced with a boot tip to test the muster's boundaries. There were notes written small on a panel's underside. There were the faint signatures of our presence tucked into corners. We thought private, and the servitor erased them with a rag as if wiping sweat from a brow. The rag came away nearly clean each time. We had left less of ourselves than we imagined. "Can you hear us?" Rin asked it. The servo skull embedded at its breastbone turned a degree and clicked. Then it lowered its head and kept erasing. That night brought a new order on the Vox. Inspection. Hands. We held them out into the dark by reflex. Palms up, knuckles down, like conscripts at first light. Heat skimmed my skin, a breath that was not breath. I flinched and felt an almost physical disapproval, a pressure that tightened the aquila on my flak plate. "Still," the voice said, though I cannot swear I heard words. After a long moment, something tapped the scars along my left palm in the precise cadence of a data slate pen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A pause, then the same count on the right. Noted. I lowered my hands and could not shake the sensation that I had been tallied and found adequate to a purpose I did not understand. Hunger deepened into that particular gray, where you can taste your own breath. Rin dreamed of bread and woke chewing the edge of his bedroll. Threads caught in his teeth like grass. I caught his wrist and he came back up fast, eyes wide, the kind of wide that shouts without sound. "I heard mess call," he said. It was the old one from the 122nd. "Form a line, take your measure, cups ready." I swear on the gate. I told him there had been no call. He insisted there had been, and then the depot solved the argument by producing a line we had not made. A chalk dash every half-meter from the workbench to the door. A perfect queue laid out for ghosts. We did not stand in it. We also did not step on it. We tried the chimera hulls on the third day, crawling belly flat into one with a floor of rust that sang against my flak. The compartment smelled of old sweat and a sweetness that made my gums ache. On the bench a trooper had carved letters into the paint with the point of a bayonet. The strokes were careful, slow, each letter formed like a man forced to learn his name again after a blow to the head. "All hands." Beneath it, a second line in the same hand. "Stand to." No names, no prayer, no plea, just the orders, stacked like the only 2 bricks left from a house. The fourth day, or its shadow, brought the Skitari. Not in flesh, their absence was the point. We found their trace in the upper gallery, a catwalk that circled the depot like a balcony. Along the railing hung prayer tags cut from metal foil, cog-tooth stamps bitten into their edges, each pierced neatly and tied with wire. The cant was low binary, simple as a child's bedtime liturgy. Grant order, reject entropy. Loops closed, ratios kept. The tags chimed without wind. Rin touched one and snatched his finger back with a hiss. "Hot," he said. I set the pad of my finger against another, and felt nothing but cold and the clean suggestion of arithmetic. The Skitari were long gone. Their prayers remained because prayers are machines of a sort, and some machines keep running long after the hands that wound them are ash. When we slept that cycle, sleep came like a trespass. I dreamed not of Cadia, as it had been, but of this depot made perfect chimera hulls repainted, Vox units singing the square tones of parade, a commissar's hat set at a mathematical angle on a head without a face. I woke to the soft scrape of something touching my boot. The servitor had set my laces in a new pattern, crossed at the 4th eyelet instead of the 3rd. The neatness of it a promise that if I changed them back the room would cool again. I left them as they were. I did not want to know if the muster's patience had an end. We spoke less. Talking felt like stepping out of line. Even our silence aligned. Our breaths fell into the same rhythm. Our blinks synchronized until one of us forced a cough just to prove we could. The depot grew intimate with us in the way a cell becomes intimate with a prisoner. It learned our footprints. We learned how to leave none. On the 5th day, the timetable on the chalkboard altered without a hand. A new line added between inspection and rations. Identification. The word was written with more pressure than the rest. The chalk ground to a stub midway through the 2nd syllable. We had nothing to present but our names and scars. The thought of offering either felt like removing armor in front of an unseen officer. You do it, because that is the way, and somewhere in a ledger, a pen says noted. The Vox came early. 3 clicks like knuckles on a door. "Section 3, said the voice that wasn't a voice. "Present." Rin looked at me. I looked at the dark. A parade diamond took shape at our feet in chalk we had not seen a hand lay. The angles were so perfect the corners felt sharp enough to cut. We stepped into it because that is what you do when the Aquila is stamped over your heart. Rin stood at my right. I set my hands just so. The depot's air tightened, an inspection room hush. Then from the doorway, boots. The muster did not hurry. It never has to. It arrived with the patience of stone and the certainty of drill. And as the first helmed head turned toward us, the Vox breathed the word we had dreaded and craved in equal measure. Confirm. Confirm. The word slid through the depot like a blade laid flat. Not a shout, not even a full breath's worth of sound. Yet every organ in my body obeyed. I felt my spine locate its parade length. My chin found the angle that had been beaten into me on drill squares a lifetime and a planet ago. Rin's shoulders aligned to mine as if pulled by wire. Boots entered our periphery. Matte black, toe caps abraded to a uniform dullness, soles that made sound without echo. The helmets above them did not look at us so much as across us, as though our outlines were marks on a page that had to be compared against a reference diagram. A servitor came first, trundling with a hush I had never heard from one of its kind. It bore a tray fixed to its chest on a folding strut, and upon the tray lay a slate stylus, a strip of parchment stamped with a half-melted purity seal, a vial of something clear that shimmered like heat, and a burnisher of the type Medicae used to press dressings flat. The servitor's mouth stitches had frayed along one corner, and in that gap a wet gleam showed. It presented the tray as a priest might present relics. Behind it the column halted on a count I could feel but not follow. The Vox breathed again. Identity. There is no mercy in being known. There is only the relief of removal. The weight of doubt lifted. The new weight of certainty applied. I gave name, rank, regiment, service number. The numbers left my mouth without consultation. The tray's stylus lifted on a currentless sway, and tapped the parchment as if each syllable had a mass. Rin followed, his voice roughened to wire. The stylus accepted him too. No challenge, no catechism, no commissariat cruelty, just the arithmetic of presence. Confirm, the Vox said once more, softer now, like rain thinning. The servitor leaned in. It took my left hand in its cool fingers, and turned the palm up, so gently my muscles tried to sprint in the opposite direction. The burnisher pressed along the scars and callus, until my skin shone in the low light, as if the tool wanted to polish me into the metal I had been when the Aquila first sat straight on my chest. Then the clear liquid, a single drop, glassing the center of the palm. Heat followed, a delicate focused heat that made the lines bloom pale, made the old Las burn from Geryon stand out like a map made for someone else's eyes. The stylus hovered, then inscribed nothing, because there was nothing to inscribe. The count had been recorded somewhere we could not see. Rin flinched when the drop touched him. The nearest helm turned a degree, and the pressure in the room changed. Not threat, not yet, but the promise of correction. He froze. The burnisher kissed his palm, found its way along the ridge where a shell fragment had left him crooked at 14. And I heard, or believed I heard, the faintest intake of satisfaction from behind a dead Vox grill. Not pleasure. Fit. A piece in the right slot. Purpose. The voice murmured. The question hung in the air without a question mark. A category rather than a query. I thought of food, of sleep, of escape, of prayer, and all of them looked absurd in the light that followed. The helmets shifted together, a flocking motion too exact to be organic. Somewhere beyond the door, a chalk line redrew itself with an audible whisper. The servitor's tray retracted a fraction. Rin spoke first. Hold the line, he said, because a Cadian cannot help himself. I wanted to add the rest of the catechism, to die standing, to make a wall where there is none, but my mouth closed of its own accord. The muster did not need recitation. It needed obedience shape, not its poetry. The inspection moved through us without moving. We stayed in the diamond, and the column circled, a ring of invisible measurements. A helmed head paused at my shoulder, and a gloved hand extended with such unhurried care that my eyes watered. 2 fingers pressed the Aquila stamped into my flak, Not hard, not soft, just present. For a heartbeat I felt as if a key had turned in a lock I had worn so long, I had forgotten it was there. Warmth flared beneath the press, a warmth that had nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with memory. Then the hand withdrew, and the absence it left scraped across my ribs. The Vox spoke once more. Adequate. I have never hated a word with more gratitude. The column stepped back on a count that left no footprint. The servitor reversed, tray steady, head inclined in the parody of respect they are built to mimic. It did not collide with the chimera hull, or the bench, or the rail of helmets, because the depot had no obstacles anymore. The room had arranged itself to their path as if anticipating an old habit. Chalk marks faded as the boots receded, but not all of them. A few lines remained, thin and insistent, running from the door toward a tunnel we had not used. A root, or a pen stroke underlining a phrase in a manual. We did not break the diamond until the air released us. I do not have another way to write that. There is a moment when parade ends, when the music dies and the officer nods and men become individuals again. Their aches theirs, their thoughts their own. This was that without music or officer, only the sense that the room had looked away. Rin let out a breath that sounded like tearing cloth. I found my hands shaking and hated them for betraying me to myself. We could have run then. The depot doors were open to a corridor, wiped clear of debris and scattered metal by the same gentleness that had corrected my laces. No walls barred us. The Skitari prayer tags barely chimed. Freedom made no sound at all. But freedom is only a choice if there is somewhere to go, and the chalk lines drew our eyes like a finger under text. The timetable on the board had changed again. Beneath identification, a new word, written in the same careful hand. Assignment. What if we don't? Rin asked. His voice made the air itch. I thought of the cooled room when I misaligned the canteen, of the breathless disapproval when I flinched, of the way the Aquila had seemed to turn on my chest as if orienting to a signal. I thought of Cadia, of squares and gates and names carved into stone, and of the simple comfort of being placed where you belong, even if that place is the first step toward a last stand. Then we remain inventory, I said, and the words felt like someone else's kinder in the saying than the meaning deserved. We followed the lines. They led us past the chimera hulls, and the Medicaid casket, and the rail of helmets, through a doorway that had been blocked yesterday, and now yawned like a healed wound. The tunnel beyond sloped down, breath cooling with each yard, the light thinning to a film. The chalk grew faint, then brightened again where the floor was cleaner, as if the route had been walked and walked. The Vox clicked once, and though no word came, I tasted one all the same, in the metal, in the dust, in the thin dew of the condenser pipes. Proceed. We proceeded. After 20 paces, the sound began. A distant, unvarying cadence, the drumbeat of a world that believes in its own geometry. Not loud, not near, but true. It drew us as surely as gravity draws a fall. Somewhere ahead, the muster waited, not to receive us, I realized, but to place us. I wanted to call that comfort. I did not. I kept step. Rin did too. The depot vanished behind us like a page turned. The tunnel breathed out, the chalk lines steadied, and the Aquila over my heart settled into an angle that felt corrected.
Chapter 3. Whispers in the Void.
The tunnel that swallowed us ran like a vein through Cadia's broken rock, pulsing with a life that did not belong to stone. The chalk line underfoot thinned until it was only an imagined thread, the suggestion of order when the eye wanted to drift. We kept step, because the cadence ahead made disobedience feel like losing a handhold on a cliff. The air cooled by degrees that could have been counted on a data slate, if a man had one. We counted with breath instead, in and out, until our lungs matched the distant beat. The first whisper arrived as a flaw in silence. Not a voice at all. At first, a hairline crack of sound. The sort of noise that lets a soldier know a loose sling is tapping in the dark, or a buckle is kissing metal. Then it found shape. Third file. Adjust. The words came skin close, not through the ears but through the thin shock of the bones. I checked my spacing without meaning to. Rin did the same, our shoulders aligning until the tunnel stopped arguing with us. We looked at each other and did not admit what we had heard. Further in, the stone narrowed, where the ceiling sank low enough to scrape a man's knuckles. Someone had planed the rock smooth. Not a tool's scrape, a polish made by passage, the kiss of flak plates, and the carry of lasguns, and the brush of kit moving in file, over weeks, months, years, or a minute ago forever. The smell shifted, less rust, more ozone. That new burnt you taste after last discharge, even when the shot was clean. It put sweetness at the back of the tongue the way fear does when it is remembered as discipline. The vox on my belt, long a relic and a habit, breathed into life without a power light. Static swarmed like flies around a wound. Beneath it, a cadence voice found us, clipped and calm, the kind of calm that can only be forged in a world that has already ended. By the Emperor's measure, section leaders report. I did not touch the dial. Names snapped out of me like a drill yard reflex. 2 present. I didn't say 3. I didn't say the 4th, that should have been there since the tunnels. The 4th that Rin and I had not spoken about, because you do not say the name of the dead wrong, and under the Aquila there are more wrong ways than right to speak at all. The channel took my count, and made the small satisfied sound of a pen pressed to parchment 1,000 miles and no distance away. We reached a junction where 3 tunnels met in a geometry that did not love us back. Chalk had tried to tame it and failed. Lines overlapped, older marks ghosting beneath newer directives, a palimpsest of orders that agreed on the same destination by different routes. The whispers thickened. They did not layer, they braided. Hold, advance, stand to, check charge, dress your line. The conflict should have paralyzed us, but the voice beneath them all, the one that had inspected our hands, the one that had pressed my Aquila until the lock inside me found its key, wound through the noise like a riverbed. I followed that current. Rin noticed my head tilt and matched it. We chose left because left was where obedience kept breathing. In the next stretch the tunnel opened into a chamber that could have been a transit node once. Now it was a throat. The floor had been swept in arcs that made sense if you knew parade ground mathematics and nonsense if you were hungry. At the far wall, a defaced mural still clung to damp stone, a suggestion of the Imperial Aquila, whose heads had been eroded into beakless masks by water and the slow violence of time. Beneath it, a rank of helmets, nothing beneath the steel, lined on a low ledge with visors facing inward as if listening to a sermon. Between them, candles guttered in brass cups with a scent of tallow and machine oil. The wicks did not smoke. The air refused to carry stain. I felt watched, but not by eyes. By rubric. The sensation is hard to write, in a way that makes sense to anyone who has not lived with a commissar's pen hovering above his days. It was the awareness of being measured against a ghost of yourself at perfect attention. If I swallowed wrong, the room would cool. If I breathed wrong, the candles would thin. I found the center of my stance, and let the weight settle into the line of my hips the way a drill master taught me when Cadia still had sky. The pressure relented a hair. We crossed, and the Vox unfurled another thread. Captain Vel, account your losses. The name was a shard in my blood. I knew the sound of that rank voiced with that kind of respect. Not my captain, another's. Not my company, another's. Rin's head made a small motion, the sort of shake you give when a memory does not fit its hole. Old war, he mouthed. Perhaps. Or a war that has not ended, has only widened until dates no longer matter. I let the name pass like a convoy in the night. The reply crackled through static that felt like dust in the lungs. Losses contained. The words had the weight of a man who had bled enough to know the arithmetic. Not a boast but a ledger entry, with a smear where a name had not dried. Beyond the chamber, the whispers stepped closer to speech. Not just orders now, but fragments of lives that had been sanded down to doctrine. Check the breach. Coils hot. Sergeant, your left.
No, the other left.
The last line made Rin's mouth twitch, a memory of laughter almost born and killed before it could betray us. I remembered a drill square, where a sergeant bellowed those words at a boy who wanted to be a man so badly he kept confusing his hands. The boy learned. We all do, or we do not last long enough to hear whispers in the dark. A cross draught found us carrying a scent that made my teeth ache, scorched parchment and wax. Somewhere, liturgy had burned. The chant that rose with it was not ecclesiarchy, too plain, too bare of incense and thunder. It was Cadian, barracks clean, a hum men make when they stack their kit neat to keep winter out of their bones. It drew us through a gap in a slab, where ferrocrete had broken cleanly, like a cut done by a surgeon who loved the line of his knife. On the other side, we heard breathing, not ours, not human, not in the way that word usually sits in the mouth. Measured, measured, measured. A breath that kept time with an unseen metronome, that did not catch or stutter at fear, that did not know thirst. The Vox sighed one syllable into that breath. Ready. It did not ask if we were. It reported to us that we were. We stepped into a hall that had once served as a loading bay. The doors at the far end had been fused into a single seam by heat that had left stone glassy. In the glass our reflections stretched thin and ghosted. The floor bore the scars of many feet. The muster was not visible. It did not need to be. Its shape filled the space by the evidence of absence. Here a line of scraped polish, where arms had lifted in unison. There a ladder's rungs worn in pairs by boots that never missed. Along one wall, the outline of a notice board clean against grime. The flyers long gone, the rectangle of order remaining like a relic. The whispers swelled and settled into a voice that no longer sounded like the first, because it sounded like all of them at once. Stand by. We stood by. The candles in the transit chamber behind us did not flicker. The polished floor held the weight of ghosts and us alike. The aquila over my heart was very light and very heavy, a weight measured not in mass but in meaning. I realized, with the gentle horror of a man accepting that sleep will not come again, that the orders were not for the dead. They were for anyone who could still hear.
The order to stand by stretched until time thinned. In that lengthening, the hall learned us. Sounds we did not make began to arrive with the regularity of our breaths. The soft clack of a sling buckle settling into the same notch, the almost musical creak of a leather strap bearing weight, the precise brush of a boot edge correcting its angle by a degree we could not see. Nothing moved, and yet everything obeyed. Rin licked a split on his lip, and the taste of iron reached me, as if it had traveled along a line on the floor. The Vox warmed against my belt, heat without power, as though a palm had closed around it from the other side of the world. Static drew back like a veil, and a channel opened to a place where air was thinner. All sections, mark. The word touched the tendons in my neck. My head turned to face a point that wasn't a point at all, just the memory of a parade front none of us had ever stood on. Rin's chin took the same angle. In the glass door ahead, our reflections aligned with faint shadows that weren't ours, taller, shorter, broader, a whole company sketched in light too pale to be called light. Then the whispers shifted, lost something human, found something else. They did not become warp noise. They were too clean for that, too square, too fond of ratio. But beneath the orders a tremor ran, the sense of a voice filtered through distance so vast it needed faith to cross it. Not a sermon, a litany of numbers that meant position, ammunition, charge, casualty, repeat. I realized I was counting along before I realized there were gaps in the sequence where names should be. The gaps had weight. The muster had learned to step around them without breaking cadence. We moved when the hall allowed it, not forward, sideways, a file changing frontage to address an unseen threat. I knew the drill. My muscles remembered what the mind mislikes. I slid left, Rin right, and in that stutter step the smell of promethium ghosted the air, old and fresh at once. Along the wall, a rectangle of cleaner stone drew the eye. A notice had hung there long enough to whistle when doors opened. Now it was gone, but its ghost remained. I stepped closer. The grime around the rectangle bloomed with the prints of fingers pressed there many times, always at the same height, the height of a man posting losses and rations and orders for men who would check and nod and obey. I lifted my hand and set it to that clean patch. The stone felt warmer than the room. When I took it away, the warmth lingered in the shape of my palm as if the wall had accepted a new posting present. The hall's far seam shivered, not movement, memory catching, replaying. I saw in that glassy weld a reflection that was not simultaneous with mine. A helmed head whose visor wore a starburst of impact cracks inclined to hear an order I could not be made to believe was mine to give. Beside it, a shape I had not expected in this place, the too still poise of a sanctioned psyker in a restraint collar, eyes covered by a strip of blackened cloth that had been tied with care. The sight struck me the way cold strikes teeth. Rin's breath snagged. The whispers thickened around the outline like fog around a lamppost. "Hold," said the many voice, and an echo underneath, thinner, like a wire pulled too tight, said, "Please." We did not speak the sanction's name. We did not have one. The Imperium does not encourage such names to circulate. But I knew the smell that ran ahead of them. Incense burnt to ash, copper of old blood, the sour metallic kiss of a mind that has been hoisted like a signal flag too many times. The restraint collar had etched a faint circle into the reflection's throat. The psyker's head tilted, listening to something below hearing, and every candle many tunnels behind us would have bent had flame remembered how. Rin took a step back. The floor disagreed. His boot touched chalk that had not been there a second earlier, and stopped. The line saved him from himself with a gentleness that was almost love. The channel cracked with a new voice, not the many voice, not the inspection cadence. This one wore rank like a weight balanced on the tongue. Transmit. The word carried freight I could feel in my wrists. The psyker's head turned in the seam. My vox clicked of its own accord, dials unmoved, and bleated a sound I recognized from artillery checks. An alignment tone pure enough to make the skull hum. It went on long enough to strip memory of its adjectives. The tone ended where a breath would, and in the space that followed I heard them. The ghosts writ clear, or the living at an angle we could not see. Boots shifted. Lossoline's cracked belt leather. Someone cleared a throat with the apologetic authority only a sergeant can manage. And somewhere very close, a small voice recited numbers up to 10, and started again, as if keeping panic inside a loop. The psyker's reflection lifted a hand bound in manacles and traced the air as though drawing a square. The hall answered with geometry. Chalk bled up from the floor in a perfect diamond, around where our feet already stood. The angle kissed my boot toe. The aquila on my chest turned a degree and felt correct for the first time since Cadia broke. Something inside me surfaced to the skin, as simple and ruinous as thirst. We belonged, something said, in the way a shell belongs in its rack when the alarm sounds. Signal received, the rank voice said. It had not spoken through my vox. It had spoken through the hall, through the stone, through the stain of men who had stood here and held until the line shifted, and the world with it. Stand by for orders. The whispers folded into that phrase as birds fold into a flock. They became less many, more one. Rin found me with his eyes and asked a question he did not dare move his mouth to shape. I answered with the smallest lift of the chin I could manage. I hear it too. Relief opened in him like a cut. The worst fear is not that you are mad. It is that you are mad alone. Noise arrived down tunnel, a rustle like wind across parade cloth, a distant interplay of metal on metal that could have been chain or buckle, or the easy parts of a weapon being field stripped. No marching. The muster did not need to march where it had become the corridor. I realized then that the whispers were not only orders, they were corrections in search of a mouth. We had provided two. How many more mouths did the halls want? The glass seam throated light. Something beyond it flared, and died. A data slate screen waking to announce a confirmation, a lumen panel, trying and failing to remember a glow. the eye of a servo skull rolling past. The psyker's head snapped toward that flicker, and the restraint collar spat a single spark that made the hair along my arms lift. The many voice gathered itself against the spark like rain shouldering a roof. "Hold fast," it said, and in the same breath, though it was not a breath, another voice, papery and earnest, answered from the seam. "I am trying." The hull loved that answer. I felt it loosen and tighten around us with a tenderness I had only felt once before, on a drill square in winter, when an old sergeant stopped calling a boy by his surname and tried his given name on for fit. It is a dangerous kindness. It binds as surely as chain. Rin shifted his weight into the diamond. I did the same. The vox grew warm enough to sting. Words came, at last, orderly as clipped hair on inspection day. Section 2, confirm presence. Await tasking. We confirmed. We awaited. The seam's reflections deepened until they were almost a window. In the near distance, a parade ground without sky waited for boots that had learned to arrive. Somewhere behind that glass, the psyker lifted a face we could not see. The restraint collar clicked once. The hull drew in a breath that was not air, and the order we had been walking toward since the first whisper in the tunnel gathered like a storm at the lip of speech.
The order arrived without ceremony. A pressure change, a faint draw across the skin. Then the many voice flattened into the cadence of a range call. Fixed sectors. The seam brightened. Lines bled up through the floor like veins birthed by chalk, fanning from the diamond into wedges that claimed the hall's open space and the tunnels feeding it. The geometry chose for us, my barrel toward a mouth of dark at 1 o'clock, Rin shouldering the 7. I felt no thrill and no dread, only the quiet that descends when a task is sized to the hands that must bear it. My lasguns charge light, dead for days, woke to a thin ember of red, a promise so small it should have been laughter, and was not. Count ready, the rank voice said, and numbers answered from the stone around us, as if mouths had been set there at intervals, as if the hall itself had drilled. 5 ready, 2 ready, 9, delay now ready. Each reply wore a timbre I recognized in the bones if not the ear. Cadians, the way a place teaches you to speak even when the place is gone. Rin's voice joined them with such ease it frightened me. 2 ready. Mine followed. 2 ready. The echo that returned made us briefly more than we were. In the seam, the psyker stiffened like a wire drawn taut. The restraint collar ticked once, twice, a metered pain. Something large and far away opposed itself to the hull. Pressure like a hand pressed against an eyelid, not violent, simply present. The many voice lowered in pitch. Contact. No target vector, no range. Just the fact of approach, which is the only fact that matters when the world breaks at the edges and keeps coming. I braced without the luxury of belief. The last pack in my weapon did not refill. It remembered. Heat kissed the cell like an old argument resumed. Rin shifted a boot width to square his stance. The chalk corrected him half a finger back. The mercy of such pettiness steadied my hands. The seam's faint window showed a ripple, as if fog had tried to learn discipline, and nearly had. For an instant I saw shapes in that fog, helmets, shoulders, the slight stoop of men who have made a habit of weight, and then the ripple closed, leaving only our reflections and a smear like breath on glass that could not be mine. Mark by fire, the rank voice ordered, and a dozen lasguns answered from no visible mouths. The hull flickered with soft heat, the taste of ionized air clean as snow. No bolts struck the seam, they struck the memory of a seam, or the idea of one. In that moment I understood that we were neither defending nor attacking in any way the Munitorum would recognize on a slate. We were aligning. The hull was a device, the muster was the current that ran it, the psyker was the switch. I held my sector, and stopped trying to make the arithmetic small enough to fit a man's head. Noise came down the 1 o'clock mouth then, quiet, but honest, the sound of contact at a distance, a scrape, a breath, the tooth-on-metal rasp of kit that has been repaired too often. I sighted on the dark, saw nothing, felt everything. The lassel warmed another degree,
as if readying itself to justify a life. The vox hissed a syllable that could have been an order or a prayer. Steady. The word put weight into my heels. The psyker's head turned toward my sector. The collar sang a thin, pained note. In the glass I saw his covered eyes as two ovals of absence, holes punched through reflection into something not allowed, and therefore unkillable. His bound hand lifted an inch, and the hall obeyed with pleased rigor. My sector line brightened, my charge light steadied. Rin breathed out to reset his trigger. The many voice did not count us in, it allowed the silence to do it. I learned then that silence can be an instrument when wielded by a regiment that no longer believes in mourning. Movement, not a figure, an insistence like a thought crossing a face. My finger tightened. The Laskin answered with a shot so clean it felt like a lie. I had finally learned to tell right. The beam scratched light onto nothing, and in the seam that served as a window, something flinched the way a concept flinches when contradicted. Rin's fire cut a neat line at 7, and the echo from the stone carried both shots back to us as a kind of approval. Adjust, said the rank voice, pleased with no one, disappointed with none. The psyker's hand lowered. The collar's light died back into iron. Then came the voice I knew I would hear, though I had prayed I would not. Not the many voice, not the rank, but the drill yard tenor of a captain I had never served, and had obeyed my whole life. Losses contained, Captain Vell said again, as if continuing a report that had never ended. Stand by for relief. My mouth dried. The relief did not come. It is not a promise any sane man in the guard trusts, even when shouted from a Vox tower. Here it fell like good rain on ground that has known only ash. The hall leaned into it. I saw the helmets on the ledge in the transit chamber. In memory's angle, cock minutely as though to listen for approaching boots that would not arrive. A weightless tremor went through the floor, fine as the ripple when a fly touches still water. Rin's jaw clenched. Do you feel that? He breathed, and the chalk did not punish him for speaking out of turn. I did. Not enemy, not friend, a presence with mass and without edges, the kind of arrival that makes men look for chaplains and counts alike. The psyker's head dipped, a nod so small it could have been a spasm. In that motion I read strain the way a veteran reads weather in the color of morning. Whatever he bridged, it had widened. The Vox warmed again, and asked a question that was not a question. Section 2, hold your post. I understood the cruelty of it afresh, the order that makes a Cadian yes-shaped, even when the world is no. We held. The scene breathed and gave back a breath colder than the hall knew how to make. The many voice gathered tight, a fist made of air and training. Prepare to receive. Receive what? No one said. Orders, impact, confirmation. The difference here seemed theological. Light touched the seam. No color. Just the admission of contrast, as if the world beyond had decided to confess it existed. Figures rose in that light with the terrible grace of correct angles. Helmets, pauldrons, the hinged jaws of men whose faces had forgotten names. Among them, a cowl that did not belong to the guard at all, ragged and careful at once, and under it a mouth working as if remembering speech. The collar brightened a fraction. The hall drew its lines tighter and tighter, until standing still felt like being held in a surgeon's frame. Stand to, the rank voice said, and every prayer I have ever pretended not to know assembled in the back of my throat like a squad called on to parade. Rin said nothing. The reflections in the seam lifted weapons that were not quite ours, and took aim at a target we could not see. The candles many tunnels behind us would not flicker. The aquila over my heart weighed less than breath. The first shot did not come from us.
Chapter 4. The Veil of the Sanctioned. The first shot landed like a thought striking bone. It did not crack or roar. It arrived, a pure line drawn through the seam, too clean for loss, too honest for the warp's cruelty. The hall took it in without echo, and the reflections in the glass caught its passage, like a prayer answered, in a tongue no priest admits to knowing. Rin flinched a finger's width. The chalk forgave him. The many voice did not. Hold. The command laid our weight back into our heels, set our shoulders, and steadied the tremor that wanted to blow us apart into separate men. The sanctioned psyker in the seam changed. Not posture. Posture remained a lesson in endurance, but density, as though the restraint collar drew his outline tighter to prevent him from spilling into the space he bridged. The blackened strip over his eyes soaked up what little light dared confess itself. His bound hand floated, not up, not down, simply more present than a hand has any right to be. From somewhere beyond the seam, words rose like vapors over a chemical bath, not language, yet structured, not random, yet without mercy. The collar answered in ticks, each one a small arithmetic of pain. I tasted copper, and realized I had bitten the inside of my cheek to keep from speaking a chaplain's caution I did not believe. Identify, the rank voice demanded, and for an instant I thought it had asked it of us, cruel and senseless, as if names could anchor a man in a hall where order had become weather. The demand went past us, through us, into the seam. The reply returned in 2 layers. Not all Vord turned in 2 layers. The first was the clean bark of Cadian drill, 17th muster, 3rd and 9th composite, section leaders accounted. The second rode under the first like undertow under tide, a whisper that did not belong to any regiment, shaped like low Gothic sung through a throat of glass. No words, only the grammar of presence. It said, I am here, I am held, I am being used. Used by whom? The question arrived unbidden, and set a chill into my wrists. The Imperium uses everything it loves. It is the only way it knows to keep the light on. But there are other hungers in the dark, and Cadia's wound opens onto them. The hall did not answer. The hall has no catechism beyond hold. The second shot came faster. This one surely ours. Lost discharges patterned like rainfall, each weapon singing its square of the equation. The reflections lifted, fired, corrected. In our hall, the faintest warmth brushed my cheek, as if a lumen had remembered a past life. Rin's sector breathed movement. He stitched a brace of shots across it, and brought his stance a hair narrower. The chalk brightened in appreciation, a teacher's nod expressed in geometry. Adjust, the many voice said, and the psyker's head tilted toward Rin, as if noting his existence for the first time. Kindness crossed the seam, ruinous binding. Rin's charge light steadied, and his hands went quiet. Then the veil thinned. In the seam's false window, a corridor appeared that might have been ours years ago, before collapse and ash, a sibling hall separated at birth. The geometry matched too perfectly to be chance. On its far side, rows of guardsmen held their diamond, eyes invisible behind star-cracked visors, las guns shouldered into the same patient angle. The captain's tenor carried across distance, as if distance were merely a failure of discipline. Hold until relief. No relief came. Of course it didn't. The order matters, because it cannot be fulfilled. It keeps men upright when sense would let them fold. The sanctions bound hand lifted higher. The collar's ticks accelerated to a hum a man hears with his teeth. His mouth worked as if forming liturgy, but no ecclesiarch would own what he prayed. The smell of scorched parchment swelled and fell, replaced by solvent and the clean frost snap of ionized air. For a heartbeat I thought I could feel the pressure of the golden throne's distant light on the back of my skull, a warmth remembered from catechisms and barracks hymns. I corrected myself, as a soldier must. The Astronomicon is the beacon, the throne is the cost. If anything, what touched us was the suggestion of navigation, not salvation, an alignment rather than a blessing, rumor rather than fact, felt by a man too hungry for certainty to be safe. Vector, the rank voice called, and a dozen replies followed, clipped, correct, gap-toothed where names should be. In those gaps I felt the sanction's breath lengthen, thin, steady, like a lifeline paid out into an ocean no map admits. I do not know what he touched. I know only that the hall held him while he did it,
and that holding cost something we were not asked to count. A ripple crossed the seam, a bruise appearing on light. The opposite file shifted. One trooper staggered half a step and recovered, his barrel never wandering outside his sector. A lost bolt struck somewhere it should not have, and failed to exist. The many voice did not rebuke, contained, it said, with the same weary authority as losses contained, and I felt the arithmetic steady beneath my boots. Someone, somewhere, paid for that steadiness in a currency dearer than blood. The sanctioned spoke then, not with a voice, but with the arrangement of silence. It organized the quiet, it drew a grid on the nothing and asked us to stand in it. The chalk brightened under our boots, and tiny radiance, hairlines you would miss if you had never scrubbed parade squares, fanned from the diamond's corners to touch the hall's edges, a net cast without rope. Rin licked his lip and didn't bleed this time. My Aquila turned that same barely measurable degree and settled, as if a compass had found north beneath a sky that no longer remembered stars. Transmission achieved, the rank voice announced. Await tasking. The hull breathed out, the reflections in the seam held. I finally let my lungs take more air than a drill master permits at attention, and tasted the fatigue in it, sweet, metallic, edged with a strange, almost medicinal aftertaste. It reminded me of the infirmary tents on winter campaigns, where Medicae boiled instruments in pan after pan, while men prayed or pretended not to. We had crossed into a place where obedience is not an act but a medium. The sanctioned was the veil between rooms of the same ruin. The muster was the hand that pressed us into our cutouts, and we, Rin and I, the last two in a ledger that kept writing itself, were the proof that Cadia's discipline had outlived Cadia's ground. The hull loved us for that. Love is the wrong word. It fit anyway. The vox warmed again, readying a word we had felt gathering since the tunnels. When it came, it was simple, a mercy disguised as an order. Hold your post. We did. The seam held its reflection. Somewhere behind that glass, Captain Vell turned his head toward an officer I could not see and nodded for both of us. The sanction's collar dimmed to iron. For a moment he seemed smaller, a man where a tool had been. Then the ticks began again, and the veil drew tight.
Tasking arrived the way frost arrives. First as a taste, then as a certainty spread thin over everything that breathes. The vox did not crackle. It opened. Orgi Wille. One word, a whole machine, nested in it. The sanction's head lifted, until the restraint collar drew taut as a garrote, and the seam became less window than wire. The geometry under our boots tightened, lines drawing new lines, until standing still felt like being gripped by kind hands that would not release, even if the room burned. Rin's fingers eased over his stock and settled into a cadence of pressure that matched the sanction's breathing. I did not think to be afraid. Fear is a tool that needs slack. There was none. On the far side of the seam, the other hull sharpened by a degree, the way a barracks comes into focus when the lamps go up before inspection. I could count the scuffs on pauldrons, the uniform chip to the starbursts on visors, the shared angle of chins drilled into men until bone yields. Captain Vell moved without moving, the minute redistributions of weight that tell soldiers where to look. He did not look at us. He looked through, across, alongside. The hull did not mind the prepositions. The hull was a hinge. What swung upon it was duty. Origin, the rank voice requested, flat as a page. The reply came not as a place name. Cadia admits no geography now that isn't wound, but as a cipher string crisp enough to shave with. Rin blinked like a man recognizing the cadence of his own name, embedded in a prayer. I recognized nothing and everything. The Imperium is a choir of such strings, sung in pitch until the song holds ships on course and men on their feet. The sanctioned gave a small sound that might have been breath-catching or iron complaining. The collar hissed. He kept the wire taut, and we became a repeater station no cartograph would mark. Orders that had been crushed beneath rock rose, passed through the sanctioned, through the seam,
through our hall, collected the taste of our air, and went on.
At battlefield commands.
Those are short knives meant for close work, but the longer kind. Allocations, confirmations, ledger lines of men and material, shipped where the administratum had lost the thread. Third composite accounted. Ammunition by regulation measure.
Casualties contained.
The last carried the weary mercy of truth and lie stitched into one cloth. To say anything else would be mutiny against arithmetic. To say only that would be mutiny against the dead. Somewhere behind us, in the tunnels we had learned by hunger and correction, a bell we had never seen chimed once.
Bashwood.
The sound covered its own tracks as it faded.
Ah.
The servitor from the depot, Med 4, minus the rag, rolled to the threshold as if summoned by a pressure change and halted without entering. Its tray was empty now, its head bowed at an angle that suggested observance. The servo skull at its breastplate clicked a metronome, only the sanctioned followed. I had the sudden uncomfortable sense that the machine had not come to serve us, but to witness the audit. Adepts love ledgers. The universe, when it is very tired, loves them too. A murmur like binary prayer passed along the rafters.
Low cant.
Cheap as tin and exact as teeth. Ratios kept. Loss with intolerance. Loops closed. I have no fondness for the priests of Mars, but I felt gratitude then for any language that could make a net out of numbers and throw it across a broken world. Rumor says the Mechanicus can bind saints inside engines and call it efficiency. Rumor says many things. What I knew was this: the Skitarii tags we had found had not gone cold. They were participating. The hall tolerates many liturgies, as long as they agree on angle. The seam flexed, not a distortion, more like a muscle learning a new weight. The sanction's mouth moved soundlessly, and the collar blazed once. So brief and clean the afterimage was a circle burned into the notion of sight. Rin took a half step, not recorded by any chalk, and laid a palm against my shoulder blade. A contact as formal as a salute. He did not squeeze, he remained. I felt the shape of him there the way a man feels a familiar weapon against his thigh in the dark. In that touch, I understood something the hall could not teach: why men obey long after the instruments break. It is not the Aquila alone. It is the proof that someone will stand in the adjacent square until the end arrives and calls the count with your name in it. Relay complete, the rank voice said at last, and the sanction sagged within the collar's permission. The wire slackened, without letting go. In the opposite hall, Captain Vell inclined his head, a gesture so precise it might have been templated. Noted, he said, and in that syllable lived food, ammunition, and a little more time stolen from a fire that did not dim. The reflections neither smiled nor softened. Oh, the guard does not waste fuel on relief. Silence returned without emptiness. A new order gathered, the kind that turns a hall from instrument to chamber again. Somewhere above, stone settled with the careful courtesy of old buildings. The servitor reversed, tray still empty, its tracks making a rhythm that wanted to be music and never would. The vox cooled by a whisper. The diamond under our boots kept its bright edge the way a knife keeps it after a competent hand has honed it well. Then the veil showed its cost. A smear darkened the sanction's throat where the collar had ridden. It was not blood. Blood is simpler. This was the bruise of having served as a bridge between rooms that do not agree on gravity. His bound hand twitched in a way that made my teeth ache. The hum under the hall faltered a beat. The many voice closed ranks around the failure, as a squad closes around a man who has stumbled during review. No one looks down, everyone adjusts half a pace. The formation remains perfect, so that reality will be embarrassed into compliance. Rin swallowed hard enough to click. He'll break, he breathed. The chalk forgave him again. I tasted the sentence in my own mouth, and refused to let it out where the hall could hear. We had been granted an arithmetic that worked, and men die for less merciful math than that. Stabilize, the rank voice said, and the word did not sound like a command. It sounded like a prayer, uttered by a man who refuses to admit that prayer is what it is. The Skitarii tags trembled. Somewhere a condenser pipe let down a single drop onto metal with the note of a metronome blessed. The collar dimmed to iron. The sanctioned's shoulders steadied. The bruise remained. A weight, the many voice added, and time resumed its thinness. The seam dulled until it was again only glass, only weld, only the memory of a door. Our reflections reasserted their ownership of the room. The candles many corridors behind us would not flicker. In the cooled air, I could smell the ghost of a chapel that had never existed here. Oil, sweat, paper, iron, an altar built of what men have when there are no saints. We did not lower our weapons. The hall had not released us. We had merely been put back on the hook that holds a soldier between orders. It is the hook most of a guardsman's life hangs from. I could feel the next word assembling in the ducts and ducts of the building like weather forming in a chest, patient and inevitable. A storm named duty, rolling its shoulders before the run.
The storm named duty broke as a whisper. Reassign. The syllables entered the hall with the softness of dust and the force of law. Our diamond brightened until its edges made a fine ache in the eye, and new lines bled outward in paired lanes, narrow, deliberate, like litter-bearers' paths set through a battlefield before the battle starts. The sanctioned lifted within his collar, as if a hand beneath the floor had raised him an inch. The seam's false window regained its depth, that sibling hall brightening to the hush of inspection lamps. Men stood where men had stood for longer than a sane story will tell. Detach, the rank voice said, and two sectors on the far side peeled with such exactitude that the movement looked like a figure in a lithograph sprung to animation. They did not leave their posts. They apportioned them to ghosts who stepped perfectly into the vacated squares. The arithmetic held. A relief that was not relief occurred, and the ledger did not crack. Captain Vell's mouth made a shape I recognized and could not hear. Good. The sanctioned collar answered with a spark that smelled of metal bitten by winter. Then the order crossed. Not through Vox, not through mouth, through the hall. Section 2 designated escort. Rin's head tilted the way a man tilts when a miracle and a trap used the same tone. The chalk drew a thin corridor from our diamond to the seam, a lane of white so sharp it seemed to hum. The Skitari tags above us chimed, once, as if a minor god of ratios had approved a transfer. We did not break stance. We were moved. The corridor firmed beneath our boots, and the seam answered by ripening into a door that was not a door, depth coming on like fever. The weld's glass thinning until my reflection stood overlaid with a second image that tried my outline on, and found it a tolerable fit. The sanctions bound hand lifted in a small painful benediction. He did not bless us. He measured us against his failing strength, and judged we could be carried. Purpose, the many voice asked, that bureaucrat's catechism that keeps men from inventing reasons when reasons are expensive. I answered before I knew the answer had been placed in my mouth. Hold, carry, return. The trio rang through the metal like a bolt run home. The corridor brightened until the edges of it ached. Rin's hand found the small of my back and rested there. No push, no pull, only a reminder that 2 is a number. A mind can stand under when the roof lowers. We went forward, not a step, a consent. The scene took us in up to the ankles, then the knees, cold as a forge that has forgotten its last heat and remembers it only as cleanliness. The sanctions collar ticked hard enough to raise the hairs along my arms. The bruise at his throat purpled another shade. The opposite hall met us without surprise. We stood, and we were standing. The geometry allowed both to be true. A trooper a pace off my left breathed out the measured breath of a man who has learned to ration even exhalation. His visor starred into my own. Between us was glass, absence, and a discipline old enough to grow moss. Escort, the rank voice repeated, and the sanctioned turned his covered eyes toward a mouth of darkness behind Vell's formation. The mouth was not a tunnel entrance. It was an emission, like a word rubbed out of a page hard enough to thin the parchment. The corridor of chalk extended to it, and halted, as if unwilling to guess at distances beyond counting. 2 helms in Vell's ranks angled a degree, hands flexed around grips. Nothing else changed.
You cannot adjust what doctrine has not named. We crossed the last inch of seam and the air changed maps. The smell of our hall, oil, tallow, chalk, thinned, replaced by cleaner metal, and the faint scorch that follows 1,000 last discharges that all struck only their intention. The sanction's head cocked, listening to pressure the way a sailor reads a sail with his teeth. The collar's ticks timed themselves to our hearts. It is a thing a man knows without mysticism. Cadence seeks bodies. We supplied too. The omission breathed, not in and out, forward, the way a void draws heat from skin without moving. I felt my Aquila answer with a quarter turn that settled a tremor I had not admitted. Rin set his boot to the corridor, and the chalk under him brightened, not with light, with correctness. We went on, and with every pace the sanction's restraint sang a smaller song, thin wire thrumming, then weakening. I knew bone deep, drill deep, that if he slackened, the corridor would become sketch, then rumor, then nothing, and we would fall not down but out, into a direction the body has no word for. Maintain, the many voice said, and every body in both halls learned the art of stillness, as though for the first time. Captain Vel lifted 2 fingers, old sign, carry on. The omission deepened until it showed a color not of light, but of distance. Bruise bloom, shiplight seen through smoked glass. The corridor touched it, and did not die. The sanction sharpened within pain like a man forced back into a child's handwriting, until each letter is perfect again. The bound hand made the smallest square in the air, and the omission steadied as if embarrassed. We found the missing there. Not corpses, those are kindness when found. Not names, those the administratum can recover if permitted infinite time. We found their places, squares waiting with a patience that hurts, chalk ghosts of boots, the negative space of rifles where rifles had been. The corridor ended among them. Rin reached down and set his palm to one of the squares the way a priest lays a hand on a reliquary. His fingers trembled. The chalk did not. I kept my sector because that is what you do when meaning arrives, and offers you the temptation of reverence. Count, the rank voice said, and I heard many mouths answer, ours among them, our breath among 1,000 borrowed breaths. Present, I said. Present, said Rin. Present, said men who were here, and men who were not, and men held between. The sanction's collar flared once, martyr bright, and in that flare the omission admitted a shape as modest and merciless as a ledger line a route back. Not for us, for the ones whose squares we stood among. Not a march, a recognition, space made so that order could walk where flesh could not. The hall behind us and the hall before us both listened with the patience of old fortresses. Captain Vel's head inclined that fraction again. The Skitari tags wherever they hung in this geometry chimed in low cant, a single word that makes adepts smile, and ordinary men uneasy. Verified. The corridor did not lengthen. It did not need to. Purpose, once established, becomes its own ground. The sanction sagged. The collar caught him with a prim, cruel mercy. I felt the slack travel down the corridor like a wave returning from a shore, and knew our permission was ending. Rin closed his hand in the chalked square, and lifted it empty, as if to show the room what it had given back. Nothing in his palm. A new steadiness in the air, like a tent line pulled true. It would have to be enough. Return, the many voice said, and the seam obeyed by becoming less. The omission closed to a bruise, then to a rumor, then to the polish of an old weld. We stepped backward, without movement, and were where we had been. Weapons up, lines bright, lungs principled. The sanctioned bowed his head a measure and did not break. The bruise at his throat remained, the kind that darkens for days. Rin took his hand from my back. The space it left ached like a struck chord. The Skitari tag settled. The servitor was gone, its tray's absence more present than its service had ever been. The rank voice let the silence stand long enough to be counted, and then said, what every soldier who has yet to die both hates and needs to hear, hold your post. We held. In the glass seam, our reflection steadied into men again. Somewhere a bell we had never seen chimed half a note, and swallowed the other half. The hall waited for a word large enough to be the next machine.
Chapter Fee. Beyond the Golden Throne's light. The order that followed was not a word so much as a posture taken by the air. It threaded the halls and tunnels like a seam that would not tear, stitched through stone and lung, passed from reflection to flesh, and back again, until the geometry under our boots felt less like chalk and more like a scar, set hard. We obeyed because obedience had become the weather, and yet in the hush that followed, another weather gathered at the horizons of sense, a pressure like the omen of a storm that might never break and might drown whole systems if it did. I would call it rumor, if rumor did not sound so small. Rumor first, then in the long wake of Cadia's ruin, way stations along routes no chart trusts, report sightings that refuse to decay. A company-sized shadow on auspex that moves with parade precision and leaves no heat. A distress beacon answered in the clipped cadence of Cadian drill by a voice that cannot give a ship name because ships require worlds, and their world is a tense more fragile than present. On mining moons where the night never surrenders, crewmen find barracks made from nothing, bedroll impressions aligned in regulation spacing, canteen ghosts hanging where hooks are not. On the walls, chalk tallies with a discipline that makes priests uneasy, losses contained, written in a hand that has learned to write around grief without erasing it. No one sees the hands that write. Everyone understands the arithmetic. Closer to the wound, transports limping out of the eye whisper of boarding actions conducted by regiments that do not clear their boots on Vox and do not request rations, only access to munitions and the dignity of an inspection hour. A gun crew turns to see 6 figures in battered flak and star-cracked visors, correcting the angle of a carriage by a degree no cogitator had thought to consider. The next salvo lands truer than math predicted. When the crew look back, only chalk remains, a diamond so perfect it shames the deck into cleanliness. I have heard, this is where prayer enters, that in some far sanctum on terra, where the adeptus custodes never look because their gaze is reserved for larger brightness, an administratum clerk types a figure he cannot justify, regiments unaccounted for that nevertheless appear in ledgers as affected aid. No sector is named, no seal is affixed. It is the kind of line that makes a scribe sleep badly for years without knowing why he wakes. If this is true, it is only true the way a barrack story is because it keeps a specific cold away. If it is false like incense, useful even when it lies. What I know is this: the veil we crossed was not singular. It was a function, repeatable, where discipline and desperation meet in correct proportion, and a sanctioned mind survives the arithmetic. The sanctioned in our hall sagged within his iron mercy, and did not break. That matters. The corridor we escorted into a mission held. That matters more. A route was marked that carried no bodies, and nevertheless eased the weight of absence in a place our boots could not reach. If you think that's small, you have never held a line and counted minutes with your teeth. Rin slept standing for the first time that cycle, a soldier's trick learned in winters. The Imperium pretends to forget. I watched his head find the wall with the soft inevitability of a rifle returning to its rack. The seam had dulled to weld again, and in it our reflections were only ours. I said the barracks grace without voice, the short one, the one you say before cold rations, Emperor, make this enough, and felt the Aquila settle like a promise I have no right to ask for. The hall listened the way halls do when they have been made into instruments, attentive without love, precise without pity, exact without malice. It is a kind of holiness that embarrasses sermons. There are believers who will tell you the golden throne's light reached us then, a warmth behind the skull, like the first breath after drowning. I will not argue. I will also not agree. The Astronomicon throws a great certainty across the dark, and ships learn to trust it even when they do not deserve to arrive. What touched us, if anything touched us, felt less like salvation than like a north invented by need, alignment offered as rumor, accepted as drill. Perhaps that distinction is cowardice. Perhaps it is the last respect a guardsman owes truth. When dawn cannot exist, men make one. Ours came as 3 clicks on the Vox, the sound of knuckles on a door men have already opened. Section 2, the rank voice said, stripped of every ornament except duty. Present. Rin woke with a breath the hall approved of.
I answered. The sanctioned lifted within his iron collar until the bruise at his throat purpled a further shade. Med 4 trundled to the threshold and bowed without entering, priest and broom in one. Above us, the Skitarii tags made a small sound like coins settling into a counted stack. Somewhere beyond any seam, Captain Vel inclined his head for men whose boots he would never hear. In that tilt I understood the Imperium is not only hatred, it is also echo. The order that followed was the same as the first one. A boy hears on a square, he thinks is larger than he can fill. Hold your post, it means die well, if die you must, but it also means live in the shape that was given you, so that other men can stand inside its outline when your name becomes chalk. The diamond beneath our boots kept its edge as fine as a surgeon's tool. The corridor that did not exist unless we agreed to it, waited like a road no cart will rut. Rumor swelled at the edges again, of Cadians seen on worlds that have never known their stride, of lost discipline rehearsed in the breath of men who swear they were alone, of a child who drew a perfect parade front in dust, with a stick on a market moon, and could not say where he had learned the angles. Rin looked at me with a question he had asked the day discipline first found us. Who do we belong to? The answer has not changed. The Aquila is a lock, duty is the key, names are how the ledger breathes. The Emperor, if he hears anything through the machines that keep his light, may have turned his face a fraction toward us, or not. Either way the count is taken, the boots strike stone, the order repeats, and somewhere past any seam that a sanctioned mind can span, men hold until relief that will not come still shapes them into a wall. We stood, we endure. In the corridor of rumor and chalk, the missing learned the way home that is not home but a place to be counted from. That is enough arithmetic to keep a guardsman upright. It has to be. The halls loved us for it, in the way halls know how to love, by maintaining their angles, by keeping their vox clear, by tolerating the prayers that make ratios into roads. Outside, Cadia's bones drifted in the dark like islands in a sea that refuses to end. Inside, our post held.
Endurance becomes habit, the way scars become weather, present, whether or not you name them. The hall taught us to breathe in fours, to drink in sips, to let silence carry the long parts of a day that had no dawn. The seam remained a weld, and yet behaved like a horizon. Rumor pressed against it with a patient hand. The sanctioned slept in the narrow permission pain grants, head bowed within iron that had remembered how to be mercy. Med 4 kept its vigil at the threshold, tray empty as a mouth that has given all its words to duty. Above the Skitarii, tags clicked like small bones settling. Rin and I stood the watch with weapons leveled and hearts tuned to a metronome. We could no longer pretend belonged to us. Between one breath and the next, the vox warmed a fraction. No pop, no static, only the sense of attention returning. All sections, a count. The many voice had sand in it, the kind you taste on parade grounds when wind claws the square. I gave our count, Rin echoed it. Around us answers came from places that used to be air. I could tell the difference between a living throat and a practiced echo now, the way a veteran knows the weight of full kit at a glance. The whole did not mark the difference, it accepted both as presence, and in that acceptance, I heard a theology more honest than sermon. The Imperium needs the living, it also needs the shape they leave. We were not alone in learning. The sanctioned woke into his collar, like a diver, waking into cold. The bruise at his throat had gone from purple to a color that makes a medicae reach for a strap. He did not reach. His hands belonged to iron, and the wire that crossed the seam. When the rank voice said relay, he lifted his chin, and the room tightened in sympathy, chalk lines brightening, distances choosing themselves, small errors erasing their footprints. We had crossed before. This time, the corridor arrived without spectacle, a neat addition to a geometry already pleased with itself. The seams weld, thin to the width of a breath, and on the far side, Captain Vel's formation inclined, as if rehearsed to greet a shadow they no longer doubted. News passed then, that no history will print, because it was fashioned from confirmations and absence. A Depot 3 systems out had received munitions that no ship's manifest confessed. A pilgrim convoy had been diverted around a storm that did not form. An Astra Militarum company, no world name, only a number, had held a refinery against a warband long enough for a Navy strike to arrive, and in the after-action, chalk diamonds were found on catwalks. No man had time to chalk. Affected aid, said a scribe's tone that reached us, shaved of emotion by distance and faith. Contained, replied a captain's voice that had learned how to tell mercy from flinching. The sanctioned fed the wire until the collar hissed like a wound, cooling under a medicae's hand. Rin shifted a boot width, and the chalk allowed it, writing the correction under him, rather than freezing him in place. We were being trusted with a discretion only obedience earns. He leaned just close enough that our pauldrons grazed. If this reaches Terra, he breathed, what do they do with it? I tasted the question as iron. The Adeptus Custodes will not turn, their gaze is for a different brightness. The High Lords do not amend reality, they inventory it. The Ecclesiarchy will call it miracle or heresy, depending on which column saves more souls. The Mechanicus will name it a function and file a patent in heaven. The Guard will hold until orders say otherwise, and then hold in the new direction. They will count it, I said, and the answer hurt him the right amount. The sanctioned faltered, not a break, an asymmetry, small and terrifying as a miscount. During inspection, the wire slackened, the corridor dulled, and for a breath's length, the seam showed only our faces and the weld's fatigue. The many voice closed the gap around the failure with a gentleness I had not known doctrine could own. Stabilize. A drip from the condenser timed itself to the word. Med 4 rolled forward, one handspan and stopped, as if the machine understood the limits of mercy. The Skitarii tags above us chimed in low cant, so soft it made the hair on my arms lift. Loops closed, ratios kept. The collar's light steadied to iron again. The bruise did not recede. We learned how to live with that. After the relay, the hull did something I had not expected. It listened for us, not the way it listens for orders, but the way a barracks listens when a boy says a truth out loud, for the first time, and the room decides to accept him anyway. Rin filled the space with a sentence no catechism had given him. If they never send relief, we can still be it. The scene did not brighten, the tags did not sing, the vox did not bless him, but the air changed, less cold, less thin, the way a winter tent warms when a second body enters, and a third hand pours the water with steadier fingers. I thought of every square I had ever stood on, men shoulder to shoulder, the Aquila, a pressure against the heart, reminding you that you belong to a shape larger than name. I thought of the missing squares we had found in the omission, waiting with the patience of stone. I thought of Captain Vell's nod, that traveled rooms without footfall. Present, I said, not to the rank voice, not to the ledger, but to the space that collects men who consent to be counted for more than themselves. The order that followed was old as dirt. Rotate. 2 shadows slid forward from Vell's line, and 2 receded, their squares filled by echoes that held their places with the same indifferent perfection. On our side, the diamond dimmed and brightened, as if breathing, then settled. Our shift was not over. Shifts are abstractions when clocks have lost jurisdiction. Still, the body knows when to give another body a square. I pictured hands I would never touch finding steadiness in lines we could lay from rooms away, and for the first time since Cadia broke, I felt something like the relief promised and never delivered. Not a ship, not a commissar's announcement, the relief of proof. We were given no dismissal, we were given endure, and we did, because endurance, once taught, recites itself. Outside, beyond welds and rumor, the bones of our world wheeled on in a sky without up. Inside, under the Aquila's weight made lock and key, we learned a truth the administratum cannot enter in any ledger, that a post can be larger than its coordinates, that a regiment can be longer than its roll, that a hull can be a hinge and a prayer in the same breath. The sanction's head bowed,
Med 4 withdrew to the threshold, and became still as a note held in a throat. The Skitarii tag stopped chiming, because ratios once kept, do not brag. When sleep came for Rin again, he fought it, and lost, as a good soldier should when the body insists. I kept the watch and let my eyes touch the weld that had been a window, and might be again. If the Golden Throne's light reached us, it did so as rumor shaped into drill, an alignment offered to men willing to be instruments. If it did not, we fashioned enough of a north to march by. In the quiet between orders, I heard boots in a corridor no map will mark, and knew that somewhere, on a deck I will never see, a child's chalk line was being corrected by a careful hand. The Vox clicked once, the sound of knuckles on a familiar door. Section 2, the rank voice said, readying a word that would set our weight into our heels for another cycle. I answered before it spoke, not from eagerness, not from fear, but from the kind of certainty a man earns by standing where he was placed until the shape of him is useful to others.
The word endured in us longer than the silence that carried it. Endure. A shape men could live inside. A shape that outlives the lungs that obey it. Rin stood straight, though his knees wavered with the weight of hunger. My own bones felt like hollow brass, ready to ring if struck. The hall noticed none of it. Or worse, it noticed everything and accepted us still. In that acceptance lived the kind of cruelty only the guard understands, approval that costs more than refusal. The scene did not brighten again that cycle. It stayed a weld, dulled and scarred, but it pressed against the eye, as though something waited just beyond the thickness of iron. Rumors stirred in its shadow, the way wind stirs banners no man has raised. I heard a cough that was not Rin's. I smelled boot leather, warmed by bodies no body produced. In the long absence of confirmation, absence itself began to confirm. The diamond at our feet kept its edge. That was proof enough. Whispers reached us from farther than Vox should carry. Reports, maybe, or confessions spoken across systems by men who did not know they were overheard. A mining crew trapped under rock sang cadence songs that matched the pace of our own breathing. A garrison on a shrine world fired volleys that landed truer than their cogitators could explain. A commissar, they said, vanished in the middle of a sermon, leaving only chalk on the lectern spelling present. Whether these were lies, hysteria or echoes, they marched with us in silence, and silence is a discipline stronger than faith. Rin muttered once, against orders and against his own habit, "We're not guarding anything. We're being kept alive so the shape doesn't vanish." The chalk did not rebuke him. It brightened faintly, as though agreeing. I did not answer. He was wrong and he was right. The guard does not survive because men believe in victory. We survive because the line itself refuses to dissolve. If we are prisoners of that line, then so be it. Chains are still chains, even if they are forged from discipline. The sanctioned stirred. His breath rattled, collar clicking with a weak pulse. He had been bridge and veil, corridor and ledger. Now he looked only like a man, frail, diminished, skull too heavy for the neck that bore it. Yet the hall did not let him fall. Its silence propped him upright. Its geometry locked his shoulders. He remained because the order had not been rescinded. Endure. When his lips moved, no sound emerged, but every hair on my arm rose as though hearing it. Perhaps it was prayer. Perhaps it was just the body learning to mimic what it had been made to carry. Perhaps the difference no longer mattered. I thought of Cadia then, not as ruin but as drill square. Dust lifting at dawn, boots stamping patterns into earth so worn it had memory of its own. Sergeants with voices like gravel, commissars with pens sharp enough to cut a soul, captains with ledger eyes that saw only columns. All gone, and yet here, resurrected in chalk, in whisper, in absence that would not yield. Cadia does not live because men remember it. Cadia lives because men cannot stop obeying it. The Vox warmed again. Only one word, the same word, the only word the hall had ever truly needed. Hold. We did. And in the silence that followed, I realized the truth that the administratum will never write, the ecclesiarchy will never bless, and the mechanicus will never patent. The guard's ghost does not linger for glory or revenge. It lingers because someone must be counted, someone must be present, someone must stand the post, even when the world beneath that post has broken into dust and ash. That is what lies beyond the Golden Throne's light, not salvation, not the Emperor's gaze, but the endurance of obedience itself. We are not waiting for relief. We are the relief. We are the rumor. We are the count. And until the last whisper fades, until the last chalk line is erased by hands kinder than ours, we will remain present.